Okay, guys, this episode we're going to talk about word formation, which is basically when you make new words, and there's a couple of ways that we do this in English. So, the first way we can do this is to use morphology. Basically take small words that we've already got and put them together to make big words or add endings and things like that. So we've already got lots of other words. What new words can we make out of the ones we've already got? So there's two different ways that you can use morphology to make words. And the first one is called derivation. The second one is called inflection. I'm going to give you some examples so you can tell them apart. So first of all, derivation is when you add different affixes onto a word to make new words that have a different meaning from whatever you started with. So something like a word like happy that you turn into happiness. So I've added an ending, and the ending ness can change the adjective happy into the noun happiness, like that. Or maybe I would say the word glory, and then I would make a verb glorify to make something glorious. Or I've got the word stupid, and then I can say stupefy. So basically phi is a derivational ending that can turn an adjective into a verb. So a lot of the time when you use these derivational affixes, the resulting word that you create might actually be in a totally different word class. Like I might have changed a noun to a verb or a verb to an adjective or whatever. Or, for example, at the end, which changes the verb into the person doing it. So it's changed the verb to write into the noun a writer. So these are all derivational affixes because they're actually making a new word. Now, the part that you've got is you start with the root, which is a free morpheme, something that can stand by itself. And then the affixes you are adding onto it to make these new words are called bound morphemes. They're bound morphemes because they are bound onto the other word. They don't work by themselves. When you're using derivational affixes, you are creating new lexemes, as in you are creating new basic words. The opposite of this is when you use inflectional affixes. So these are things like I write, she writes, I am writing, or one dog, two dogs, or big, bigger, biggest. In each of these, the endings that you've added, these suffixes like the S on writes or the ing on I am writing, they haven't made a new lexeme. Instead, they've just made different grammatical forms of the same word. So they've done the grammar, like they might be doing the tense, they might be a plural ending, they might be a comparative ending like big, bigger, biggest. So these are called inflectional affixes. So these are the ones that just do the grammar. They don't actually make new lexemes, they just do the grammar. So they're also bound morphemes. Yeah, they don't mean anything on their own. They have to be joined onto the main word. Anyway, there's my explanation. Let's compare some side by side. Something like a player or tenderize or colourful edible weakness. Each of these words has a derivational affix because, for example, in the first one you've got play and then you've made the noun player by adding the derivational affix er, which means it's a person who's doing the verb. Or then you've got the adjective tender and then you've made the verb tenderize, or the noun colour and then the adjective colourful, and so on. So each of these, you have actually made a new lexeme. You've made a new basic word, as opposed to an inflectional one might be like cats, or plays, or playing, or played, or smaller, or smallest. So all of these inflectional ones, essentially they've just done some kind of grammatical thing. So they've done tense, or they've done plurals, or they've done a comparative, like a smaller and superlative smallest. Okay. Bit of a gag for you there. Right, so enough about the morphology. There's another way you can do it, which is just you get new words from somewhere. And there's this word neologisms, which just means new words that you'll see used a bit. For example, one of the ways you can do it is by making a blend, where you get two words and you smudge them together. So smoke plus fog blends together to form smog. Or bro, like shortening of brother, plus romance gives you bromance. So we have a lot of these in English, a lot of these blends. So you've actually combined the two words. Or you might have, people say abbreviation, and abbreviation's a real word, obviously. You need to be specific though, because there's a couple of different types of abbreviation you might see. Basically, anything that makes things shorter is some kind of abbreviation, but there's a couple of different categories we might mention, such as an initialism or an acronym or a shortening or a contraction. What do these mean? Well, you've got a lot in English like RSPCA, RSVP, PTSD, DIY, KFC. These are what you call initialisms, because you actually say the initials. You say each of the letters individually. And then you've got things like SCUBA or LOL or ANZAC or NASA. These are acronyms because you've got all the initials there, but you're saying them as if they're a word. It's only a small difference, and it's funny because some words start as an initialism and then later on get used as an acronym. That's happened with LOL, because people used to say LOL, and these days people increasingly just say LOL. And some of these ones, technically an acronym is supposed to write in all capitals, but some of them get used so much that they just become normal words. Most people don't even know that SCUBA started out as an acronym. And these days you just write SCUBA as a regular word. It's an acronym standing for Self-Contained Underwater Breathing Apparatus. But these days, most people don't even know that. Another kind of abbreviation is called simply a shortening. And that's like fridge, which is from refrigerator. Or I'm going to the gym, which is short for gymnasium. Or I've got the flu, which is short for influenza. Or get him on the phone, which is short for telephone, and so on. And then you've got contractions where you've actually shortened a word. You've maybe elided a few letters or something, a few of the sounds, a few of the phonemes, and you end up with a contraction like cannot being contracted to can't, or will not being contracted to won't. Or maybe just one word, like little, often because the T in the middle gets elided and you just have lil. And a contraction you can write with an apostrophe there to show that there's missing letters. Or there, like they are. English has heaps of these. Don't, shouldn't, all of, lots of the negative verb forms we just use contractions for. Even pretty standard in English, to be honest. Okay, another thing you can do is compounding, which is when you get two free morphemes and stick them together, like Facebook or firefighter or bookkeeping or sleepwalker, slam dunk, lots of them. Sometimes they'll have a hyphen, sometimes they're just written as one word. Sometimes you might even have something like apartment block. And then you could argue as well, even though there's a space in the middle, functionally it's still acting like a compound. Sometimes the exact definition can get a little bit blurry depending which linguist you ask. But basically, if you've got two free morphemes stuck together or hyphenated or basically acting together, they're a compound. There's another thing called conversion, which is something just for some reason changes what word class it is. Particularly things turn into verbs is pretty common. So like you had the software Photoshop, it's often these days used as a verb. It's not just a proper noun of this software anymore. Things like we photoshopped our profile pic. Or sometimes it doesn't even have to be from a noun. Like in Latin, you had the preposition versus, which means facing, like we're facing this team on the weekend. But in Australian English in the last 10, 20 years, I have noticed more and more kids have converted verses from being a preposition borrowed from Latin into a verb and saying, who are you versing this weekend? And stuff like that. There's another thing called a collocation, which is when certain words just always hang out together. So at some point someone said, this whole question is clear as crystal, but then crystal clear has been used together so much, it's kind of become, functionally, it's like one lexeme. Crystal clear is like one useful chunk that just exists as these two words happen to hang out so often together, they're kind of used as one thing. Or middle management. No one thinks about it being management that is in the middle. We just think about middle management being one thing. Cosmetic surgery. No one really thinks about breaking it down to surgery, which happens to have a cosmetic purpose. You just think of cosmetic surgery as one thing. A point of view. Some of these collocations here are borrowed from other languages, which brings me to the next topic. We can get new words just by taking them from other languages. And these borrowings come in two varieties. There's loan words, where we just take them as is, like tsunami or ninja from Japanese, or chocolate, tomato, avocado. They're from a language called Nahuatl, which is the traditional language spoken in Mexico by where the Aztec Empire was. Or from Arabic, alcohol and algebra, or boomerang and koala from Australian Indigenous languages, or coffee, chai, and tea from different parts of the world. Funny story with the chai and the tea, I'll talk about that another time. These are all loan words, so we may have changed the pronunciation a little bit to fit into English phonology rules, but we've basically just borrowed them. The opposite of them, those are all loan words. The opposite of loan word, or the counterpart to it, the other kind of borrowing, is a calque. So if you borrow it as is, it's a loan word. But if you translate it when you borrow it, it's called a calque. And we've got quite a few of these as well. For example, German has the word Biergarten, and in English we mostly say beer garden. We borrowed it, like the place out the back of the pub with the seats where you can sit in the sun and drink beer and eat food. We borrowed it, but in borrowing it, we translated it also, which makes it a calque. In French, you've got point de vue, and then we translated that into English as point of view. So we borrowed it from French, but in the process, we translated it, makes it a calque. Chinese, you got xinao, which means wash brain, and then we calqued that into English as brainwashing. The funny thing is that calque is a loan word because we took it straight from French, whereas loan word is a calque because it's translated from the German word Lehnwort. Linguists always find that funny. I don't know if you guys will. Anyway, there's another thing called commonization, which is when something is a brand name, like a proper noun, but it gets used so much for that object that it just becomes a common noun. So people just talk about Blu Tack, even if it's not Blu Tack brand anymore. Or people talk about a thermos, even if it's not thermos brand, that thing that keeps your hot drinks hot and your cold drinks cold just keeps getting called a thermos. Or Lamington was the name of someone. This little cakey thing with the chocolate and the coconut on it was named after him. And nowadays people don't think of that being a thing named after that person. It's just the name of that kind of little cake. So they get turned into generic common nouns. And then eventually words can go somewhere to die. And then words that have kind of fallen out of use or sound old-fashioned are called archaisms. A lot of these, you still know what they mean. You've heard them before, but you would never really use them in everyday life unless you had a reason to want to sound very old-fashioned, like thou or thrice or hark or forsooth or behold. Maybe even slay. For a long time, slay was an archaism because it used to mean like kill something, like slay a dragon. And then at some point, like 5 years ago, suddenly 12-year-olds thought it was cool to say, you know, slay the day away. And it was a cool thing. And suddenly it got resurrected as a totally normal word. But apparently it's kind of died out again. So it's like it's died twice. It's become an archaism for the second time. Anyway, there's a lot there. Go back and rewatch the video, pause, write down some examples, and hopefully that helps you.